Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, an internet outage felt round the world.
Take a look at this down detector. This monitors outages. You can see everything from Amazon.com to Venmo, McDonald's, all impacted.
How Amazon's cloud outage revealed a serious dependency on a few U.S. tech companies. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Before we continue with today's show, remember to leave us a comment telling us what you think about this episode. Do you think the internet is too dependent on U.S. companies? Let us know. And if you're listening on your podcast app, leave us a review. It really helps the show. Thanks.
My name is Belle, and I'm a reporter for The Wall Street Journal, where I cover business and technology.
Well, Belle, welcome to The Take. It's really good to have you. This week, you co-reported an article for The Wall Street Journal that's headlined, "The Day Amazon Broke the Internet for Millions of Americans." And not only is that title very clickable, it also sums up some of the frustration that so many of us felt this Monday when Amazon's Web Services, or AWS, went down, taking everything from banking to gaming to streaming sites down with it. Things are back up and running now, but just how bad was this outage?
In the grand scheme of things, this outage was extremely widespread and very bad. If you look at the sort of scale of the websites that went down, as you mentioned, financial platforms like Venmo were down, so people couldn't exchange money. Banking platforms were down, so a lot of transactions were delayed. Students talked about not being able to take exams or submit their homework as a result of their back-end platforms being down. And you even have, a lot more sort of disruptive services in our daily lives, like flights that were delayed. And so really looking at the big picture, you can see the sort of influence that a company like Amazon has in our daily lives and in our work and for governments. And so when millions of Americans are interrupted and time sort of feels like it's standing at a standstill, then you can see the influence of a company like Amazon in our lives.
So we know that services came back online by Monday afternoon Pacific time, and Amazon has since issued an apology for, quote, "the impact this event caused our customers." How much did the glitch shake confidence in Amazon Web Services, though? Is that apology enough?
Yeah, that's a great question because these outages have happened before. There was an outage in 2017. There was an outage in 2021. They've also happened among the other large cloud providers or tech companies, Google and Microsoft included. And so there's, among business customers, some level of expectation that the cloud platforms are not perfect and that technology will go down. But at the same time, when you have such a backbone and such a important part of the fabric of our lives that's dependent on a service, you have an expectation that it'll work as expected. So in a lot of ways, the apology can seem insufficient, especially when you have businesses that have lost large amounts of money, people whose lives were disrupted. But there's also, I think, among some tech folks, this sort of understanding that, the cloud is imperfect and things like this will happen, especially as more and more of the internet-connected apps and services depend on Amazon.
Tech folks understand that the cloud is imperfect. I wonder if that extends to the rest of us. I first noticed something was wrong late on Sunday night, and I could not put my finger on what it could be, but I couldn't turn off my lights at home. And it sounds ridiculous, but they are lights powered by Amazon's Alexa. By the morning, my WhatsApp was down. Slack was only half functional at work. Other people in businesses in the US and abroad reported hits to things like Snapchat, cryptocurrency exchange Coinbase, the websites for Delta and United Airlines you mentioned. Help us understand how these things are connected to Amazon Web Services.
So Amazon Web Services. It's essentially this cloud computing platform. And if you want to think of it as a physical entity, it's a set of data centers, essentially these vast server farms that are usually located in pretty rural areas, at least in the United States, and in this particular set of data centers that went down. And so when you have a glitch like the one that occurred on Monday that has really sort of cascading negative effects, the complexity of these systems really come to the fore, because it's not just one data center or one set of data centers. It's really these interconnected sets of services that when one thing goes down, a lot of the others are unable to continue functioning. And that's what leads to this kind of overall negative effect on all the internet connected apps and services. And so the way that apps and services like Venmo connect to the internet is because they rent out these servers from Amazon. And so when some of the servers go down, then that disrupts service for a lot of everyday people like you and me.
This glitch happened at a data center on the East Coast of the US, but it had global consequences. So the site Down Detector monitors internet outages, and it said it recorded more than 17 million outage reports across 60 plus countries. That includes Japan, Germany, Brazil, and others. What does that say about the state of the internet today?
We know, and it's been the case for quite some time, that the internet is very much dependent on a few large tech companies to maintain their operations, to be up and running. And it's not necessarily the internet itself, but internet connected apps and services that all run on renting these servers from Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So one thing that Monday's outage sort of serves to reinforce and underscore is really the sort of dominance and influence that these companies have in our lives. And I think it serves as a reminder as well that, over-reliance on a single provider can lead to some pretty disastrous consequences.
You mentioned earlier that so many of these companies rent out this space from Amazon Web Services, and that's why they're so reliant on it. Why do they have to do that? Why don't they have the infrastructure themselves?
It used to be the case that most businesses, organizations, entities had their own data centers. And so the sort of server farms that I mentioned before would be sort of smaller in scale and would be owned privately by a company like JP Morgan. But as cloud computing really came to the fore about a decade ago, it became a lot more obvious that it was easier to just rent it out from Amazon. Amazon would kind of do it for you. It was the idea of owning your own garage and having your own car rather than leasing it and having someone else manage it for you. And so that's part of the reason why Amazon really sort of rose to the top in sort of dominating the cloud computing market. It was the first to really pioneer it and has since continued to innovate and add more services and really hook people and businesses onto its platform.
Well, we're talking about Amazon because, of course, that is where this outage stemmed from. But Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are considered the big three of the cloud market. So how did US-based firms get here? How did they become so dominant?
The US-based firms have for a long time kind of continued to innovate, as I mentioned before, in terms of their apps and services. And so that serves as a way of bringing more customers, more businesses onto their platforms. But there's also, by the same token, some business tactics that the big tech companies, the big cloud companies have put forth as well that have made it harder for companies to move their data and applications out of those platforms once they're inside. So from a technology perspective, once you put all of your stuff, your digital stuff into Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud Platform, it's really technically difficult and expensive to move it out. And the companies have made it even harder to do so.
So you're kind of stuck by the convenience of it. Well, it sounds like something that should ring alarm bells for consumer advocates or regulators, potentially. Why has it been so hard to break these companies' dominance within the U.S.?
That's right. It absolutely has raised some alarm bells for antitrust regulators, for lawmakers who sort of recognize that the internet is so dominant, so dependent on a few large cloud and technology companies. But they've really kind of, from a technology perspective, maintained this stronghold. And so even when, from a legislative perspective, you try and encourage a breakup of, say, Amazon and Amazon Web Services, the data and applications that companies have still reside within the platform. So it can't be understated or overstated, rather, how just important that data, once it gets in one place, continues to live there.
More with Belle after the break.
A young woman killed a stranger in South Korea because of her obsession with true crime stories. Her curiosity for dark tales became a deadly impulse to try out one of her own. Is the media responsible? Does true crime harm more than it helps? Hear the full story on True Crime Reports.
So, Belle, let's talk about the financial impact that an outage like this can have. Do we have any idea how much money was lost because of the glitch?
Well, it's too soon to tell fully how much the overall financial impact was. We can sort of look at past history as a sort of lesson in the types of losses that occurred. There was a big CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is a cybersecurity company outage not too long ago.
CrowdStrike says it identified a critical problem in its software and is working to fix the issue. Around the world, computer users were greeted with an error screen that some people have referred to as the Windows blue screen of death.
And there's the same sort of impact where flights were delayed, people couldn't get to where they needed to go, trains were delayed. And as a result, there's an estimated $5 billion in losses for Fortune 500 companies during that time. So I wouldn't be surprised if the scale of what happened with Amazon was somewhat similar. But to date, we haven't been able to sort of quantify quite yet what the full amount is.
Okay, well then, if we have CrowdStrike and that outage to look at as the precedent, do you think that there have been lessons learned from that outage and then this outage, if it's not too soon? And do you think that this will change how businesses decide to work moving forward?
Absolutely. This has served as a wake-up call, I think, not only to consumers like you and I who use services that run on AWS or Amazon, but also for businesses to, when I talk about from a technology perspective, think about, am I just using Amazon or am I using Amazon, Microsoft, and Google or some other cloud provider or my own data centers? Am I using multiple regions, not just the Northern Virginia region that went down, but also maybe a West Coast-based region or a different region in the East Coast area? So from that perspective, it's a reminder to diversify the sources of your technology providers. Just like you wouldn't want to be dependent on just a single bank for all your banking needs, you might want to diversify your portfolio, diversify your banking needs, diversify your cloud computing providers.
So I can see that being feasible for the execs of a company like Slack or Meta, which own WhatsApp. I don't see that being as feasible for your small mom and pop shop business that is relying on Amazon Web Services for their website and, for their shopping experience for consumers to even seek out that information. Where would one even start?
I think you're absolutely right. The folks that are most vulnerable to outages like this and hardest hit are the small businesses. They're not the largest IT executives at the biggest companies in the world. And so I think part of the consumer education around this is really that when outages like this happen, there's an extra reminder that you have to go out and do the research. There's not a lot of, I would say, consumer advocacy around IT because it's really kind of in the weeds. It's technical. But reminders like Monday kind of serve as a wake-up call to pay a little bit more attention to the way in which you manage your technology because it can have really disastrous consequences in this internet-connected age.
Well, Silicon Valley is dominated by so many of these companies that we've just mentioned, this handful of tech giants. And that's not just an issue for those of us here in the US, but it's for the rest of the world that depends on these services as well. Sometimes you hear about other countries talk about things like tech sovereignty. How would you explain tech sovereignty and what that really means?
That's really the idea where you have your own sort of digital infrastructure. You have your own apps and services and sort of connection to the digital world that in some cases exists solely within the boundaries of your nation, of your region. And so that's sort of data sovereignty if data exists just within those regions and resides there completely. But overall, the idea of tech sovereignty is that you have perhaps your own national-based providers, your own national tech companies that sort of serve as maybe a hedge to the dominance of Western or US-based providers. And so we do see this increasing push among regions and countries like the EU, which has strong data sovereignty laws.
We must build, understand, and lead. That also means digital sovereignty, developing and innovating future foundation models ourselves, so that our values live inside the technology.
China has also a very strong sort of national push to build up its own cloud computing providers. Alibaba is one of the biggest in the world as a result. And so tech sovereignty is very much a topic that's becoming even more important in the age of AI, where you have these big AI companies that are very much focused and based in the United States, kind of sending out their AI models out into the world, but they're built and trained and designed in the United States.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know that you focus on AI. What would it take to actually pull off something like you're describing?
Well, it takes a lot of coordination among regulators and lawmakers in the individual nations and the regions. There is a increasing push to encourage national AI development and data centers within these regions. So you need to build up the physical infrastructure. When we talk about NVIDIA and when we talk about data center build out, that's what we mean by we have to build the infrastructure. We have to make sure the land and the power is there to actually provide the horsepower behind these things. Mm-hmm. So when we're relying on data centers, it's not just the big one in Northern Virginia that Amazon runs that went out on Monday, but maybe it's a data center in France. Maybe it's a data center in China that powers a lot of what occurs on the internet.
And then, of course, that is going to ring alarm bells for people who think we don't actually want these data centers in our neighborhoods because of the pull on resources, energy, water, and various other environmental concerns that could potentially raise. So perhaps it's a good thing that they're based in select few places and not everywhere. Do you see there being weight to that argument?
I think that's right, but there's also an increasing sort of urban pull of these data centers. One of the things that's important to note from a technology perspective is that when data centers are closer to where the data is actually being consumed. So I'm based in New York, and so there are data centers that are in the tri-state and New Jersey and even in New York City that support the apps and services that I use. And so that's where latency, this idea of latency or the speed in which the data connects to you is really important. And so for people who live in cities or people who live in urban areas, data centers are getting closer and closer to where they live. And it's not just these kind of urban or rural sprawl areas.
Well, finally, Belle, I want to end where we began with that provocative headline in the Wall Street Journal, the day Amazon broke the internet for millions of Americans. And the conversation online that I was seeing was really about how do we break this dependence? What does this mean for everyday people when we can't access the things we've now come to rely on in our everyday lives? You are a reporter who covers tech, AI, enterprise. What do you tell people when they ask that question? What's your advice for people?
I think that's a fantastic question because, again, as we talked about with small business owners, there is so much at risk for the most vulnerable in our society. And it's not so much the biggest companies in the world that have the resources to do this, but the individual folks. And one of the things that I think consumers can start to do is advocate for this sort of diversification of their cloud platforms. While it seems kind of in the weeds and very technical, that's sort of the state of the play of our modern internet-based society, that you have to look at your Venmos and your Instacarts and your Pelotons and say, well, are you solely reliant on one cloud provider, or do you have multiple region redundancy so that this sort of thing doesn't happen to me? And then separately, as just an individual, there are things that we can do to make sure that our most important files and services are accessible online. So maybe if you use Google Docs, then your documents are available offline so that if an outage like this strikes, then you can still have access to your most important stuff.
So practice what you preach. Is that what you do? Do you have a whole bunch of hard drives, and are you ensuring that your life is not solely in the cloud because of what you must know that the rest of us don't?
I wish I had a little bit more of insider knowledge, but I do have hard drives and thumb drives. I still have those.
Well, Belle, thank you so much for this conversation, for this advice, and for this analysis. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me.